Kuroda Hukumi, a well-known actress and columnist in Japan, said, "A typical Japanese person aims for 100% level of completion in any work that they do. No, in fact, they probably believe that delivering 120% is even better. Even though it is their first time trying it out, there are no room for mistakes. When a task is finished, rather than being happy at what one has managed to accomplish, they will constantly be checking for whether there are faults. And even if there are no faults, they believe that some points of error could still eventually be spotted, and thus continue to worry upon them." Let's not get it entirely confused. This culture centered around perfectionism in order to attain perfect results is once again also the fundamental contributing element of many of the vastly positive aspects of Japan that we all know and genuinely appreciate. For instance, in Japan, one rarely has to worry about whether a subway train will be arriving on time or not, due to the immaculate railway system that has been installed in Japan, as well as the diligent employees who aim towards perfect execution on a daily basis, without the slightest of deviations. Same can be said for the historically high quality of Japanese products in general, or the immaculately made Japanese bonsai, to the exquisitely prepared kaiseki cuisine. But as much as there are conspicuous positives in regards to such a culture of perfectionism and its entailed manifestations, there's also a dark side to such a culture that is heavily geared towards having everything to be visibly perfect, and which I'll be discussing in today's video. So let's get into it. Let's begin with a slightly lighter topic, and that is how they strive towards perfection in every field, ironically, is one of the biggest contributors as to why the vast majority of Japanese people do not excel in the English language. Perhaps one not being highly proficient in the English language as a non-native should not come as a surprise for most people. Knowing how difficult it is to study a foreign language, I am in complete agreement with the opinion that an individual should not be negatively judged by their degree of proficiency in a non-native language. However, having the privilege to have lived in cities in different countries around the globe in the past, and getting acquainted with many good people in each local regions, I began to notice the trend that the average Japanese person tends to be considerably worse in English, or at least seems to be, compared to the average East Asian, or a person from any other country in that matter. So why is this the case? After all, Japan as a developed nation has an education system that is highly ranked even among other OECD countries, and the society itself places immense significance on the value of education. Hence, according to some research, the reason as to why the average Japanese person might possess a lower level of English proficiency compared to people from other OECD nations or its neighboring countries in East Asia may be due to a reason that not many people have anticipated: their cultural tendency to strive towards perfection. Scott Aubrey, who has taught English as a second language in Japan, South Korea, as well as Hong Kong, stated that he found difficulty in teaching English in Japan, mainly due to how the students rarely raised their voice for any type of questioning and were constantly worried on whether they will make any formal mistakes. Furthermore, research demonstrated that the Japanese students were overall much more concerned than the Korean students in forming a perfect sentence, as they would pay constant attention to accurate grammar and word choice of the sentence. Some believe that such could be the primary reason why the Japanese had a hard time in terms of progressing their level of proficiency with the language, as many of them simply refused to talk unless they were sure that they had the perfect grammar in command. And over time, all of these factors could incrementally accumulate and indeed ultimately lead to discrepancies in the level of average English abilities between the students of different countries, as the Japanese culture, which values perfectionism, actually could have hindered the students' ability to progress. I personally had a friend who was a rather uncanny representation of the type of Japanese person who I have just mentioned previously. Although I knew for a fact that she was in much command of the English language based on her ability to read the text and fully understand the material at hand, as well as observing her grammar and pronunciation on the very rare occasions when she did speak, she simply refused to talk in English unless she knew for a fact that the sentence in which she was forming was grammatically impeccable. This was in stark contrast to people from other Asian countries such as South Korea, China, or Thailand, where the individuals who have studied a bit of English were more than enthusiastic in showing off their abilities, albeit with short, choppy sentences that were far from being perfect grammar. I think PewDiePie is also getting to understand such a culture that is prevalent in Japan now that he is living in the country. He said in one of his past videos that he was reluctant to say that he, quote-unquote, speaks Japanese in Japan, as the culture here is that when you say that you speak a language, you really do have to speak it properly. And if you can't speak it properly, then you quite literally don't speak English in the case of Japan. And with such a mindset where people think as in, you either do something perfectly or don't do it at all, the vast majority of Japanese people do not feel inclined to go through the painful process of the trial and error and feeling rather like a child and amateurish when learning a new language, and rather stick to the fields in which they're already comfortable and proficient at. If you've studied, worked, or have simply visited Japan for a period of time, you're probably well aware of how the nation is seemingly inundated with various forms of manuals, which effectively guides the entire behavior at the workplace. Such dependence on manuals, and following every single procedure to the T, can discernibly slow down the process of workflow and make it hard for Japanese institutions to adapt to the ever-rapid global changes, as it is practically impossible to create a perfectly coherent set of manuals in an equally rapid fashion. But again, now that we are familiar with Japan's obsession with everything being visually so-called perfect, we can start our path in better understanding exactly why they stick to the analog, manual-based way of conducting work, as well as conduct their general way of living. Let's return to Kuroda Hukumi's quote for a second, and how a typical Japanese person aims for a 100% level of completion in any work that they do. And with the existence of such a prevalent mindset, you begin to realize that the large dependence on manuals is in fact one of the most realistic ways for them to attain the desired level of thorough, perfect result in which many people in Japan aspire towards. This is as without the existence of manuals, some aspects of the process are left under discretionary judgment, which could often be different between each individual based on their subjective framework. And while a process conducted under such conditions may be notably faster and could still be considered as a task well done, it could never be perfect due to the inherent subjective nature of such processes and the lack of objective criteria. Thus, while the process may be slow, the vast majority of Japanese institutions still adhere to the method of following the given manual to perfection, as then, the person who has carried out the task can be assured of the final work's perfect nature, at least in accordance to the manual. And while such attitude towards work undoubtedly contributes to obtaining a high-quality outcome of the work that has been produced, it also has the disadvantage of often having to sacrifice speed and efficiency in the process. During my first year as an undergraduate, I still remember how I was more than surprised to see that every document had to be stamped with my own personal seal, as well as having to prepare and go through so much paperwork, even with the simplest of scholarship applications. And that was at Waseda, which is widely considered as one of the more progressive academic institutions in Japan, often recognized for being one of the faster, if not the fastest, academic institution when it comes to embracing influences from foreign countries when necessary. So one can only imagine how delayed and manual-based the processes are at an average, not to mention a conservative Japanese institution. This will be an inevitable facet of life when you come to Japan and handle anything bureaucratic or work-related. Other than the reason of the constant strive towards perfection, there is, of course, another reason why the Japanese love manuals: its ability to allow you to escape from potential blame and being placed in the predicament of having to admit your imperfections. Hence, while some may find such prevalent social mindset frustrating to a degree after the honeymoon phase in Japan, it is up to us to be able to understand the cultural elements deeply ingrained within the Japanese psyche, which pressures the average Japanese to go to such extents that in Japan, admitting your mistakes is not a straightforward matter of saying, "I'm sorry," and just moving on. In its cultural atmosphere, where perfection and prevention of failure of any form is of the utmost priority, it is literally a matter of life and death. That's it for the end of this video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and a subscribe. I'll see you guys again soon with more interesting content in regards to the fascinating nation of Japan. Cheers guys, have a good one.